Lawyers of Reddit, what was your OSHT moment in court? Not OSHT bad, OSHT. I can't believe she said that. First jury trial, pretty serious charges. I'm cross-examining the alleged victim, and in answering my question she says, "Oh yeah, I lie all the time." Needless to say, I won that trial. Story from a friend of mine, he was defending a guy in court. Don't remember what he was charged with. The main witness for prosecution was on the stand and was asked if she could identify the defendant. She was scanning the courtroom and seemed confused. My friend was already silently celebrating, because if she couldn't identify him, he could probably get all charge dropped. As he was mentally adding this case to the win file, he happened to glance over at his client, who had just helpfully raised his hand to make it easier for her to identify him. Even the judge facepalmed on that one. Never ask a question to which you don't know the answer. Prosecutor suggested to me client that the canned goods he had burgled were to be used to trade for drugs. Me, thinking the idea ludicrous, asked my client whether he has ever traded food for drugs, to which he replied that he once exchanged a frozen chicken for Hero N. Needless to say, I didn't win that one. Sat in the public gallery at a bail hearing for a man accused of heinous crimes against a very, very young female relative. The judge started laying out the conditions of bail, and one of them was to surrender his passport. Man turned to his attorney and said, loudly, words to the effect of, "But you said I could fly back to my home country." The judge stopped himself and revoked the man's bail. A lawyer I used to know was in court on a work injury case. The judge asked his client, "Just what is the nature of your injury?" His client replied, "I can't raise my arm this high anymore," while she raised her arm up to show just how high she couldn't raise it. I was prosecuting a contempt action in family court, something that basically never works, and everyone in the room could tell I was winning. The other side was unprepared out of arrogance, and I was basically ripping this guy to shreds on cross-examination, which his lawyer didn't even think would happen, because he expected the case to be dismissed. At the end of the trial, the judge ruled for me and stated that she found the defendant's testimony to be untrustworthy. I was shocked at winning a contempt trial to begin with, but then this exchange happened. Defendant's attorney, Your Honor, now that you have found my client's testimony to be untrustworthy, I am requesting a continuance in order to prepare further witnesses. This concept is shocking in and of itself, because to even think you can bring more witnesses after you rest your case is laughable. Judge, you had your shot and you missed. Counsel. Defendant's attorney, Your Honor, there was no way I could have anticipated that you'd find my client's testimony untrustworthy, and as such, I didn't have the opportunity to prepare other witnesses in support of his position. Judge, that may be an argument for your carrier, counsel, but it holds no water with me. See you this afternoon for sentencing. For those who didn't pick up on it, the judge basically told the lawyer on the record in front of his client that she expects him to get sued for malpractice because he ducked up so royally. That shit was mind-blowing on multiple levels. I was the defendant, representing a nonprofit that I volunteered for. The plaintiff was a 60-something grandma who was looking for a retirement settlement after falling out of her jacked-up pickup truck in our parking lot. The premise of her case was that our parking lot was in bad shape, and that she fell into a pothole and broke her leg, which resulted in her having to take Coumadin and diminished her enjoyment of salads at the Friday night fish fry. No, really. It was going along fine, until my lawyer put up a photo of the pothole, taken the day of the incident, filled to the brim with water after a recent rain. He asked the lady if she had gotten her foot wet, to which she replied that she couldn't recall. He talked a little more about how perhaps if her foot wasn't wet, it might have been because she fell out of the truck and didn't really fall into the pothole. He asked again if her foot was wet, and she affirmed that yes, her foot was wet. The "oh shit" moment came when he went back to his desk, flipped through her deposition, and read the part where she was extremely adamant that her foot wasn't wet. Then he did some fancy legal stuff. The case was thrown out, and I went back to work. I was the dumbass that almost screwed myself. I had 2 charges in 2 different courts. I accepted the first plea, which almost always carries probation, but my plea didn't have that condition. When it came time to accept the second plea, the prosecutor didn't include probation, because she assumed my first charge put me on probation. She said as much to the judge, and me being a big dummy, almost corrected her. My lawyer grabbed my shoulder and, you not, told me to shut the duck up. She doesn't know. Opposing counsel was a nightmare. Everything late, his work was extremely subpar, and so forth. Accused me of lying multiple times when he had dropped the ball. During another hearing, in which he did another dumb move, judge says, "I'm glad you were the last case on the call, and all of the other attorneys have left the room, so they aren't here to hear me say that you are a terrible attorney." I was just interning in court during law school, but I'm a lawyer now. Fight in a club. Someone had broken someone else's jaw, and had 6 friends with him that insisted he had been identified wrongly because he never have a beard, and the victim said he had a beard. They used a very specific phrasing to the tune of, "My friend doesn't have facial hair because he is a professional in the food industry and it would go against the regulations." After 3 of the witnesses had repeated the same exact phrasing, the judge stopped one to ask if he knew what a couple of the terms in that line meant, and the witness couldn't explain it. Defense lawyer got busted for instructing the witnesses. She'd also gotten the defendant to reject a plea deal that exchanged prison time for a fine and community service. I was at a hearing arguing that my client was wrongfully terminated because the employer failed to abide by the proper procedures. During the hearing, a witness for the employer tried to offer documents that were fraudulently altered in order to make it look like the proper procedure was followed. I noticed the alteration. Opposing counsel quickly got that witness out of the room, and after a quick adjournment, my client got a large settlement. Watching a hearing, when the defendant said, I did stab her, but it was a gentle stabbing. Not exactly in court, but I was defending a juvenile robbery case where there was very little evidence. There was supposed to be 2 guys, but they only picked up this one kid. He had no stolen property on him. He was picked up, like outside his own house, wearing different clothes than the victim had initially said. This kid was on the honor roll at school. His family seemed kind and were involved. He wrote poetry and played instruments. I actually believed it was a legit mistaken identity case. I went to meet with one of the kid's mentors for a character reference, and he exactly matched the description of the other robber. I'm not an attorney, but a reporter whose beat is the county courthouse, so I've had plenty of these moments happen in front of me. A guy was convicted of attempting to murder several police officers. At his sentencing, the prosecutor revealed the defendant got a prison tattoo while he was awaiting sentencing of a tombstone with the names of all the cops he attempted to kill. But the defendant still had the audacity to beg for a lenient sentence. He got a few hundred years in jail. I was interning during law school, prosecuting domestic violence cases. The deputy DA asked me to talk for the first time during a guy's arraignment for beating his wife. An arraignment is when the defendant hears the charges against them and pleads guilty or not guilty. Basically, when the judge calls on me to speak, I got insanely nervous and told the defendant that his charge carried a maximum penalty of 30 years, when it was actually 30 days. He freaks out. The crowd, some in the gallery where his family and friends gasps. The judge basically stops me and says, "I think you mean 30 days, counselor," after which everyone, including the defendant, laughed at me.